Okay, typing, got it. Yeah, so I mean, really, the question I'm asking actually is, what's so great about Demidov?
Yeah,
it's a hell of a question, I know, but I'm aware that you weren't born a Demidov teacher. You've come through something close to Grotowski, I gather, etc., etc., etc. But now you've arrived at Demidov a few years ago, and it feels to me as if you're just absolutely committed to it. And why?
yeah, it's a great question, actually, but yeah, it's true. I mean, I trained originally more classically in conservatoires as an actor and then as a director. But then, yes, I spent a long time working in the sort of in Poland in the post-Grotowski lineage of work. But all that time I was teaching as well. And then when I came back to the UK, to London to teach, I just was hitting my head against a wall, and about why what I was teaching, why certain acting techniques were so accidental, meaning sometimes students connected, sometimes they didn't. Why was it so hit and miss? And why did it ultimately not serve the purposes that ideally I thought any acting technique should serve? So I was sort of experimenting and following my own path, kind of bringing together that sort of more classical Stanislavski-based training with the work that I was doing in Poland for many years, and sort of carving my own path in terms of the way I was teaching towards much more towards something that was intuitive and instinctive and alive, and away from the kind of willful approach that any permutation of Stanislavski, no matter what it is ultimately going to be limited because it's based on a faulty premise, and that is one of willfulness. In other words, I make choices, I make decisions, I discover through analysis. And when I was introduced to Demidov by Andrei Babel, who you know, it was like just somebody turned on a light in a black room. Mm-hmm. And everything I'd been trying to do myself, somebody had already, as is usually the case, right, in life, somebody had already blazed that path, and blazed it so incredibly, with such a deep understanding of the creative process, of what an actor's process, about the conscious mind, about the subconscious, and how those two things interact and how they feed each other. And then discovered, of course, how close he was to Stanislavski, and how the Demidov technique or school developed out of that relationship, because Demidov was teaching Stanislavski's system. One of the three, as you know, one of the three original teachers of Stanislavski's system, and kept encountering the mistakes. And as you know, kept feeding back this information to Stanislavski, who never actually taught his own technique in the school, Moscow Art Theatre School. And this is where they disagreed. But of course, Stanislavski saw the results of Demidov's work and supported him, even though they had their disagreements. And in fact, he fired Demidov for having the temerity to suggest that they needed to change things, that this wasn't working.
Yeah.
But of course, hired him back later, and because he saw how profound the results of his work were. So for me, it was kind of like a homecoming. Mm-hmm. It was everything I'd been searching for, and was completely disillusioned by every kind of acting technique that I'd been engaged with. This just seemed, Russian Andrei calls it a different universe. And I completely agree with that. It's a different universe. In the Stanislavski world, there's a sense that, the sun revolves around the earth. And in Demidov, it's the other way around. And this is why we can, I have a lot of actors who come to this work, and in the beginning, there's a sense, oh, I can mix it, I can use a bit of Demidov in the work that I'm already doing. And I never argue. I used to. I never argue anymore because they need to find out for themselves. But these things are oil and water.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can't. I tried myself. I tried when I was still teaching at Central. I was introducing bits and pieces of Demidov principles into the work I was already teaching. And yes, there was some, of course, a little taste. But in the end, you see, why am I trying to reinvent the wheel here?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, this thing exists, which, as you know, Richard, takes the actor from day one straight to the subconscious.
Yeah.
And in the Stanislavski work, Stanislavski was under the assumption that you could get to the subconscious through the conscious mind.
Yeah.
And this is, that's just a fantasy. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
But Demidov, being a trained psychiatrist, before he was pulled into Stanislavski's circle, as well as his interest in certain Eastern and Western esoteric practices, right? At the time, there was a great ferment, a great kind of spiritual ferment, pre-revolution in Russia. And he was a yoga practitioner from a very young age. So he had a kind of very wide and deep understanding of human psyche and psychology, but also of the creative process itself and how it actually functions. And he was way ahead of his time. So when he, and by the way, he developed this whole curriculum, which is why he calls it a school and not just a technique, over 30 years.
Yeah.
Kept perfecting it, even when he sort of had to go into exile after Stanislavski died, self-exile, because he got fired from all his jobs. And he wasn't allowed to publish anything, which is why nobody has heard of Demidov. But so it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
You covered about 7 of my questions in one answer. but yeah, it's interesting you say the thing about homecoming, because I think after my very first course with Russian Andrei Maliev-Babel, that's what I actually said when we were asked to give our response. Mine was, I feel like I've come home.
Right.
So there we are. Yeah, I don't know why. After trained at Drama Center, Uta Hagen, all that, explored Michael Chekhov, blah 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 blah. Yes, I don't dismiss him as like this, blah blah. But nevertheless, suddenly Demidov, I thought, oh, okay,
yeah,
okay, yeah. The thing with the subconscious thing is extraordinary. Going straight to it. I mean, you do a Demidov etude.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one you do, so you've got this incredibly simple little script, but you absorb that, you assign that to yourself, and suddenly it's sort of, well, here's your script, do it. It's what it can feel like, but it's not. And then suddenly you're debriefing, and you think, good God. She feels like she's my grandmother. I don't know where that came from. Right. After just saying hello, how are you, or something as simple as that, because it's what's going on between you and the other actor, I suppose. I don't know, but yeah, if you had to kind of distill, it's impossible to do this probably, but distill what the school and all the work is fundamentally based on. What is that possible to do that in that simple terms? I've got about a list of about 5 words which I use for myself, but you're the man.
Well, I mean, it's a very vast and I mean, on the surface, it looks very simple, and intentionally so, right?
Yes.
but it's a very vast and a very complex technique school.
Mm-hmm.
But it, the fundamental difference, let me put it this way, was that Demidov saw that our subconscious creativity is where all our creativity comes from, and through our subconscious, and that this subconscious process is not divisible. Whereas Stanislavski was, if you read his book, An Actor's Work on Self, or An Actor Prepares as we know it, every chapter is dedicated to a different element, right? Which is exactly that process of dividing what should be a subconscious process into a conscious separate element. So concentration of attention, relaxation of muscles, communion with the actor, with the audience, grasp, task, objective. All of these things are trained separately, and then saying to the actor, okay, put it all together and find some freedom. It's impossible. So Demidov calls it an organic technique, and also the technique of creative freedom, which is, if we don't have freedom as an actor, we have nothing. What we have is something that's just dead on arrival, something that's been premeditated, or I found this and I don't want to let go of it because it worked last time. It just makes it dead. And for Demidov, that sense of freedom, I mean, there are certain, what he calls cultures in the work. The culture of calm, creative calm, right? Everything comes out of a sense of calm. Every emotion, every physical sensation, everything I perceive, first of all, comes out of that sense of calm at my core. Culture of calm, culture of passivity, meaning not passivity as, digging in and being stubborn, but open and responsive and available and reactive to what I receive.
Passivity strikes me as the absolute root, actually. Passivity and circumstances seem to be the absolute root of the thing, as I understand it after just a year.
Well, we can only receive circumstances and perceive them, truly perceive them, when we are passive. And
is that not the fundamental difference between what Stanislavski is doing and what Demidov is doing? Because Stanislavski is an active attempt to get to the subconscious, whereas I'm here, come and get me is kind of what it's about, isn't it, really?
That's a big part of what the method of physical actions was about towards the end of his life, was to get through action, was to get to the subconscious. But it's the cart before the horse. And also, he didn't really understand. He could see what Demidov was doing, but he didn't really understand how to do it himself.
No.
And the idea of passivity, Demidov uses this wonderful image of a scarf in a hurricane. The scarf looks like it's doing everything. It looks like it's very active. The scarf is doing nothing. And the hurricane is the circumstances. And when I leave myself alone, which as actors, we find it very difficult to do, not to be, because the way acting is taught mainly now, in my experience in most drama schools, is doing. Acting is doing. I must be doing something. I'm trying to affect you. I'm making choices. I'm making decisions. I need to know what I'm doing at every moment. But that's all. A choice infers a decision, which is in the head. And that's not where we are as actors.
No.
And so the ability to leave oneself alone entirely, leave oneself alone and have faith in my own talent, faith in my own subconscious creativity that's going to work through me if I've done the correct preparation, right? That's something we can talk about a bit as well. Then I can completely give myself freedom. And that's only then when the circumstances pick me up like a force and carry me.
I remember at Drama Centre way back 1970 I started. Christopher Fetty's particularly frequently saying, leave yourself alone. Let
Right.
it come in on you and leave yourself alone. But two things, it hit beautifully with Demidov, but I was still desperate trying to think, am I playing an action? I couldn't work out whether I was playing an action or not. It took me ages, brother. I don't know what it feels like to play an action. You know, it drove me crazy.
Well, this is the thing, Richard, right, about actions, which is, which was meant to sort of, when Stanislavski was using, was meant to kind of spark some internal process, right?
Yes.
But if you really look at it, do we play actions in life? I don't. I mean, aren't we just responding to circumstances as they arise?
You could say we play them, but we don't know we're doing it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? We don't choose to play a particular action.
Exactly. It's not a conscious process unless you're a manipulative git, right? But I'm not sitting here right now thinking I'm going to persuade you. I'm going to persuade you that Demidov is the king.